Good day, this is Dimitri Lascaris coming to you from Kalamata, Greece on April 22nd, 2026 for Reason to Resist. I'd like to start my report today with one of the more distinguished LEGO videos of the past several weeks.
Social law caps feeling bold. Iran just opened the strait of Iran. Story told. Hormuz never heard of it. Map on the floor. Threatening bombs and he head for the door. Markets crashing. Oil prices on fire. World holding breath waiting for the empire. 24 hours later, ceasefire deal signed. Taco Supreme, same move every time. Straight out of Iran. Straight out of Iran. He called it the strait of Iran. Big talk, big threat, then he taco man. Trump always chickens out, that's the plan. Straight out of Iran.
Trump always chickens out, that's the plan. And if you're wondering what TACO stands for, it's Trump always chickens out. The theme of this recent LEGO video obviously is Trump's tendency to bluff. And we have seen a classic example of this within the past 24 hours. By the way, this video is courtesy of Drew Ponder. You can find the complete piece of art titled Straight Outta Iran on Drew's X account, and we'll include a link to the video and to his X account in the description to this report. So why do I begin my report by showing you an excerpt from this video? Because, as I've indicated, Trump chickened out yet again last night. And what happened was that the US-Iran ceasefire was set to expire at midnight, and during the day yesterday, hours before the expiration of the ceasefire, Trump said a number of things, one of which is that he didn't want to extend the ceasefire. And here you can see a report from Politico published yesterday at 10:36 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time, reporting that Trump said U.S. attacks on Iran will likely resume should the ceasefire expire on Wednesday as tensions over the critical Strait of Hormuz waterway threaten to again undermine peace efforts. Quote, well, I expect to be bombing because I think that's a better attitude to go in with, close quote. He thinks it's a better attitude to resume his reign of terror over the civilian population in his criminal war of aggression. Trump, in other commentary with the U.S. corporate media yesterday, continued with the theme that there wouldn't be an extension. He was opposed to it, and that the price of Iran refusing to capitulate to his demands again would be the resumption of the reign of terror. Here's what he had to say to one corporate media outlet.
Tomorrow, if it looks like things are progressing, will you not necessarily extend it to a definitive amount of time, but will you let it keep going if there's progress in the talks before taking...
Well, I don't want to do that. We don't have that much time because by the time both parties get there, as you know, they just got the okay to go forward, which I knew they were going to do anyway.
Now, let's be clear about what happened in the last few days as the moment of truth, namely the expiration of the ceasefire, was approaching. Trump was insisting, or at least strongly suggesting, that there were going to be further negotiations in Islamabad, and his lapdogs in the corporate media were spreading rumors, in effect, rank speculation, that Iran was going to send a delegation and was in the process of assembling a group to resume these pointless, fraudulent negotiations. But the Iranian leadership, in its vast wisdom, certainly relative to the US, the Trump regime, these people are playing 5D chess. They simply ignored the overtures and the media, and as the clock ticked away, it became increasingly clear that they had no interest in these negotiations. Now, here's Trump's announcement at the 11th hour that he was in fact going to extend the ceasefire and would not, at least for the time being, resume his criminal rampage in Iran. This was on Truth Social, and what he said was, based on the fact that the government of Iran is seriously fractured, I'll come back to that in a moment, not unexpectedly so, and upon the request of Field Marshal Asim Munir and Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif of Pakistan, sure, they initiated it. This had nothing to do with Donald Trump's desperation. We have been asked to hold our attack on the country of Iran until such time as their leaders and representatives can come up with a unified proposal. I have therefore directed our military to continue the blockade and in all other respects remain ready and able, and will therefore extend the ceasefire until such time as their proposal is submitted and discussions are concluded one way or the other. So Trump has not only extended the ceasefire, he's extended it indefinitely. He's imposed no deadline on the Iranian government's consideration of Trump's demands, which I think we can all safely say at this stage are completely unacceptable to the leaders of Iran. After all, if they weren't willing to accede to those demands when Trump was again threatening to bomb their country into oblivion, why would we think that they'll be ready to accept those demands in a week's time or 2 weeks' time and 3 weeks' time, especially when with each passing day, the pressure on the world economy and on the US economy grows rapidly. So let's then turn to this claim that the leadership of Iran is seriously fractured. There's nothing unusual about the fact that there are differences of opinion within the Iranian leadership about how to deal with this existentially dangerous situation. It would be extremely surprising if there were complete unanimity. And generally speaking, it appears that the military leadership of the country is somewhat more hawkish than the civilian leadership. And I think that that's something you often see in times of war, particularly when the war is of such tremendous importance to the future of Iran as this one is. But the fact that there may be differences of opinion doesn't mean that the leadership of the country is, quote unquote, seriously fractured, that it's being crippled by the disunity or anything close to that. And I'd like to show you some of the statements that have been coming out of key civilian leaders of Iran during the past 24 hours, which essentially all conveyed the same message, namely, as long as the US is violating the ceasefire by blockading Iran's ports and attacking its tankers and cargo ships, which are violations of international law, I have no doubt about that, and acts of war, then Iran will not negotiate and will take the necessary steps to protect its interests. So here is a statement put out yesterday as the expiration of the deadline approached by Iran's foreign minister, who I think is widely perceived to be a dove relative to the military leadership of Iran. And what he wrote was, blockading Iranian ports is an act of war and thus a violation of the ceasefire. Indeed it is. Striking a commercial vessel and taking its crew hostage is an even greater violation. Absolutely true. Iran knows how to neutralize restrictions, he wrote, how to defend its interests, and how to resist bullying. I think that's diplomatic language for there's going to be retaliation. And indeed there has been. We'll come back to that in a few minutes. Now here is a social media post from Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf, who is the Speaker of Iran's parliament and Iran's lead negotiator in last week's failed talks in Islamabad. He wrote yesterday, as the ceasefire approached, Trump, by imposing a siege and violating the ceasefire, seeks to turn this negotiating table in his own imagination into a table of surrender or to justify renewed warmongering. We do not accept negotiations under the shadow of threats, and in the past 2 weeks we have prepared to reveal new cards on the battlefield. So here too, you have not only a unified message that we won't negotiate while you're committing acts of war against us and violating the ceasefire, but an even more direct threat to retaliate. Notably, Ghalibaf, although he's currently and has been, I think, for some 6 years, the Speaker of Iran's parliament, he himself is a former Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Brigadier General. Given his background, there's not likely to be much daylight between his views and those of the current military leadership of Iran. And as I noted, he was the lead negotiator in Islamabad. Now, here is yet another comment from Mahdi Mohammadi, the strategic advisor to Mr. Ghalibaf. He wrote, Trump's extension of the ceasefire makes no sense. This would be after the extension, obviously. Within the past few hours, he wrote this. The losing side, he said, cannot set the conditions. The continuation of the siege is no different from bombing, and it must be responded to militarily. That's absolutely true in the sense that both the bombing and the blockade and the seizure of the vessels are acts of war and violations of international law. And finally, he wrote, in addition, Trump's extension of the ceasefire certainly means buying time for a surprise strike. It is time for Iran to take the initiative. So again, you have a rejection of the insistence by Trump that they negotiate while the U.S. runs roughshod over the ceasefire, coupled with, I think, a quite explicit threat of retaliation by the Islamic Republic. And finally, here is commentary from Ali Khosryan, an Iranian parliamentarian who sits on the parliament's National Security Commission. This is a summary of his commentary posted by Slaviangrad on Telegram. Resuming talks in Islamabad without receiving concrete guarantees and a clear agenda will not yield any achievements, according to Iranian authorities. This was stated by Khosryan, a member of Iran's National Security Commission. In his opinion, such talks will become a tool for managing energy markets as well as global public opinion, imposing conditions on Iran. Quote, under current conditions, Iran does not intend to participate in negotiations unless the situation changes. So wisely, he is leaving open the door to further negotiation. It would not be, I think, helpful to Iran standing in the world if it said categorically it will not negotiate with the United States under any circumstances when, as is clear, the continuation of this conflict, and in particular, the prolongation of the closure of the Strait of Hormuz, will eventually and in the near future cause catastrophic damage to the global economy. When you add it all up, this does not in any way, shape, or form amount to a seriously fractured leadership. Certainly not, you can't say that on the basis of the public commentary. And any suggestion to the contrary is just rank speculation and part of the hapless U.S. information war in which the corporate media in the West happily participates. Now, I'd like to also add that despite all evidence to the contrary, Trump is not collapsing as, Iran is not collapsing as Trump is now claiming. You can see this in a social media, Truth Social post that Trump put out this morning. He says Iran is collapsing financially. They want the Strait of Hormuz opened immediately. They want the Strait of Hormuz opened immediately, starving for cash, losing $500 million a day, military and police complaining that they are not getting paid SOS. Where are those complaints, Mr. President? I've seen absolutely no credible evidence to support that claim. Now, what Trump is referring to here when he says the loss of $500 million a day, he clearly is referring, and I'm going to show you a post in a moment which makes this clear. He's referring to the loss of income that Iran would have earned if it had left the Strait of Hormuz opened and was charging a toll to the ships that pass through. Okay, that's what he's referring to. He's not referring to anything else. That's the specific source of the alleged loss of $500 million a day. And reportedly, Iran was charging $2 million per vessel for most of the war. Now, how did Trump come up with the figure of $500 million a day? At $2 million per vessel, 250 vessels would have to pass through the Strait of Hormuz per day for Iran to make $500 million per day. And they'd all have to pay the toll, not just be given a demand for payment, but they'd have to actually pay it. But at no point during the war did anywhere near that number of ships pass through the Strait. I think maybe the highest number by far was a few dozen, but in generally it was just, it was less than 10 vessels per day during the periods where the Strait was open. And even before the war, About 140 ships pass through the strait every day. And moreover, Iran was not charging any tolls at all before the war, yet it wasn't collapsing before the war. Bottom line, my friends, is that this figure of $500 million per day is yet another number that Donald Trump has yanked out of his prodigious derriere, just as the number of people who were supposedly killed by security forces in Iran during the January riots. That too is a concoction of Donald Trump's deranged imagination. But here's the really crazy part about Trump's claim that Iran is collapsing due to the loss of tolls from the Strait of Hormuz. According to White House spokesperson Carolyn Leavitt, the U.S. blockade is not designed to close the Strait of Hormuz. It's in fact designed to impede or prevent traffic, maritime traffic to and from Iranian ports. And here's what she had to say about this within the past 24 hours.
Set timelines on behalf of the President of the United States, but with respect to the blockade, as you know, it has been fully implemented and it's being enforced against vessels of all nations entering or departing Iranian ports. I want to make that point clear. I've seen some misreporting on that as well. This includes all Iranian ports on the Arabian Gulf and the Gulf of Oman. And our U.S. forces in the region are supporting the freedom of navigation for vessels that are transiting the strait to and from non-Iranian ports. So I know some in the press were confused about that. We are supporting the freedom of navigation, just not with respect to any tanker or vessel that would benefit the economy of Iran as these negotiations continue.
So she said, I repeat, I want to be clear about this. The blockade is on ships going to and from Iran's ports. And then she went out of her way to say, we support freedom of navigation through the Strait of Hormuz. And presumably, therefore, would love to see vessels that aren't coming from Iranian ports or going to Iranian ports traveling freely through the Strait of Hormuz. So if Carolyn Leavitt is telling the truth, why in heaven's name is the Strait of Hormuz closed? If the U.S. isn't blockading it, then it can only be because Iran is blockading it. But if Iran desperately needs the money that it would be generating by charging tolls, why the hell would it be blockading the Strait of Hormuz? Trump's claim is that the country's on the verge of collapse because of the loss of the revenue from charging tolls to ships passing through the strait. So we're to believe that Iran is basically committing economic suicide. And if you really want to understand just how absurd this narrative from the US government is, check out this post from Trump today. He said, this was earlier today in the morning, Greek time, Iran doesn't want the Strait of Hormuz closed. They want it open so they can make $500 million a day. They only say they want it closed because I have it totally blockaded, in caps. So they merely want to save pace. People approached me 4 days ago saying, sir, Iran wants to open up the strait immediately. But if we do that, there can never be a deal with Iran unless we blow up the rest of their country, their leaders included, President Donald J. Trump. This is flatly contradictory to what Carolyn Leavitt said. Carolyn Leavitt said very clearly, we want ships passing through the strait. The blockade is limited to Iranian vessels or vessels that are going to and from Iranian ports. So we can infer from this, if she's telling the truth, that ships that are coming or going to Kuwait, Saudi ports in the Persian Gulf, Bahrain, Qatar, the United Arab Emirates, Oman, they are all welcome to pass through the Strait of Hormuz as far as the United States is concerned. But Donald Trump is telling us straight up that it in fact is the United States that stopped all traffic through the Strait of Hormuz. So I think it's quite clear that Donald Trump is desperate to see the strait opened, and what he's doing is trying to avoid a resumption of the war, because that's not because he cares about Iranian lives or destroying the country of Iran. He'd love to do that. He'd love nothing more would he love than to destroy Iran as a functioning sovereign nation. What he's concerned about is that if he resorts to this full-scale bombing again, especially against Iran's energy facilities, Iran will retaliate in kind, and then you're really going to have a shitstorm in the energy markets. And that's what he's concerned about. So he's trying to find a way with less intense levels of warfare to force the Iranians to open the Strait of Hormuz, which will alleviate upward pressure on the price of oil. Now, whatever the truth of the closure of the Strait of Hormuz may be, I must say, and I think fair-minded people would agree with this sentiment, that the manner in which the Iranian leadership has responded to these bizarre and extraordinarily dangerous circumstances is quite admirable. I remember that they would be the first people to be targeted, as has been demonstrated by the barbarians in Tel Aviv and Washington, not just them personally, but their families, if there is a full-blown resumption of the war. They certainly have every reason to be concerned about that. But despite that fact and all the pressure being placed upon their people, with the full support of the Iranian people, as far as I can tell, they stood their ground and refused to show up for these fraudulent negotiations while Trump was flagrantly violating the ceasefire. And one should add, it's not just Trump who's violating the ceasefire, it's also Israel. Israel killed somebody in South Lebanon with a drone strike, was shelling villages in South Lebanon after the 10-day ceasefire went into effect earlier this week. And according to Israeli military commanders, is in the process of blowing up civilian infrastructure, including schools in South Lebanon during this so-called ceasefire. So the Iranians haven't even, I think, as far as I can tell, focused on that in their public commentary. They're primarily focused on the ceasefire violations by the Trump regime itself. I think that increasingly they view Israel as obviously very dangerous, depraved, but a bit player in these negotiations. Ultimately, it will be the United States government that will have to make the concessions necessary to bring this war to an end, and will have to rein in its rabid Israeli attack dog. So what happens now? First off, there are reports, very credible ones, that Iran's military has begun retaliating for the attacks on its ships. So let's have a look here. This is a report in The Guardian. A third ship, this was just moments ago, has been attacked in the Strait of Hormuz. This was actually reported by the BBC, but picked up by The Guardian. Maritime intelligence company Vanguard told BBC Verify that the ship was targeted about 6 nautical miles off the coast of Iran. Vanguard said the vessel was hailed by Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps and instructed to drop anchor. The ship has reported damage to the hull and accommodation. It follows attacks on 2 ships earlier this morning, according to the UK MTO. A container ship was fired at by an IRGC gunboat off the coast of Oman. Wait a second, I thought Iran didn't have any navy left. And note that this is off the coast of Oman. I think that means that it's south of the Strait of Hormuz, although that's not entirely clear. And a cargo vessel came under attack near Iran shortly after. So it is quite clear that Iran is now retaliating in kind. Again, to their credit, their escalation is commensurate with the U.S. aggression. So they haven't, as yet, there are no credible reports of them having started bombing, firing missiles at military bases in the Persian Gulf or at Israel, or drones for that matter. They are going after shipping of enemy states or states that are complicit with the enemy. I'm going to come back to that in a second. And they are being quite careful about how far and at what pace they're going up the escalation ladder. But this is all they need to do to cause considerable consternation to oil markets. Now, the Iranian military has put out a statement about what it did today. This was published by the Telegram channel Fortress Resistance. So I'm relying upon their translation here. The IRGC, according to Fortress Resistance, said it sees 2 violating ships violating the blockade. Obviously, that's what is meant here. and brought them to the Iranian coast. So it's saying that not only did it stop them dead in their tracks, but it seized them, which is what the Americans are doing with Iranian vessels reportedly. And this is quite interesting. According to the IRGC, the two violating ships, MSC Francesca, is linked to Israel, and the Epaminondas, which is a Greek word, they say endangered maritime security and operated without necessary permits and by tampering with AIS. It too was seized by Iran. Well, there's a reason why this ship has a Greek name, and that is because it is owned, according to the Greece's paper of record, I Kathimerini, by a Greek shipping company. This report was published moments ago, this morning to be more precise. A container ship was fired upon without warning by a gunboat of Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. Again, I thought that Iran had no navy left. And it caused significant damage to the vessel's bridge. Maritime authorities said the vessel has been identified as the Liberia-flagged Epaminondas. So they're spelling it differently from the Photros resistance translation of the IRGC. But this is still, I assure you, a Greek word, Epaminondas. And it is, according to Kathimerini, owned by Greece's Technomar Shipping and operated by MSC. And the article continues, according to the UK MTO, the incident occurred approximately 15 nautical miles northeast of Oman in the Strait of Hormuz at 6:55 a.m. Greek time. I've been saying for weeks, and I think there's ample evidence to bear this out, that Greece is facilitating U.S.-Israeli attacks, criminal attacks on Iran, attacks which constitute war crimes and crimes against humanity. It's an absolute disgrace that Greece is doing this. The ultra-Zionist Prime Minister Kyriakos Mitsotakis, for example, allowed Greek airspace to be used by the Israeli Air Force to practice bombing runs on Iran. And currently, I believe, is allowing the Suda Bay Naval Base on the island of Crete to be used to facilitate the transport of military equipment, materiel from Northern Europe to West Asia for use in this criminal war of aggression. And I myself reported from the air base at Suda Bay about 10 days ago and videotaped U.S. military transport planes parked on the tarmac, numerous of them, and landing and taking off within the space of 30 minutes. Assuming that what I saw is representative of what goes on throughout the day at that air base, that would mean that somewhere in the range of 25 U.S. military transport planes are landing or taking off from that air base during the time of the supposed ceasefire. So Greece is understandably viewed by the Iranian government, and I would imagine by a great many people in Iran, as a hostile state. And by facilitating these criminal acts, for which, in my opinion, Kyriakos Mitsotakis should be hauled before the International Criminal Court and charged with war crimes, as should all the leaders, whatever they may be, whoever they may be, who are facilitating this war of aggression against Iran. And he should spend a good bit of time in the Huzgau for this criminality. But quite apart from that, it's very clear that Greece is going to suffer consequences as a result of facilitating these war crimes and crimes against humanity. And I can think of no better target for punishment than the Greek shipping industry, not the workers, but the owners of these ships, the oligarchs, shipping magnates who exercise so much nefarious influence over the Greek government. They're getting their comeuppance, and it is richly deserved. In the meantime, Iran is making quite clear that it retains significant capacity to wage war by means of missiles and drones. It published in the last, I think it was 48 hours, a video of its some of its missile cities, underground missile cities, and based on Slaviangrad channel, which published this video, or picked it up from, I think, Iranian media. This video was shot during the ceasefire. And here is a video shot last night at a pro-government demonstration, I believe it was last night, where the Iranian military rolled out a missile launcher fully loaded with what I understand were Khorramshahr 4 missiles. These are the missiles that release dozens of submunitions and have been used extensively in the genocidal Israeli colony during this war. Does that look like a country in collapse to you? Now, before I conclude this report, I want to share with you a clip of an interview over the past few days with a character by the name of Amos Hochstein. Hochstein, you may recall, was a top national security advisor in the Biden regime. He's also Israeli, not just American, but Israeli, and once served in Israel's genocidal military. He just gave an interview in which he was asked by a corporate media hack in the United States what Biden would have done about Iran if he had won a second term in his demented state.
2024, Secretary Blinken claimed Iran was 1 or 2 weeks away from having enough fissile material, breakout capacity to eventually make a weapon if Iran had decided to do so. There were indirect negotiations that the Biden administration did, but it went nowhere. So when President Trump argues that he did when no other president would, is it just simply that the bill was coming due and it fell on his watch?
I do think there's a certain element to that. And that's why I was supportive of President Trump joining in June to take the strikes that we had thought internally in the Biden administration we may have to take if there was a second term. We thought that the spring, summer of 2025 was probably, we may have to be there in the same place. And we did war games. We did some practice runs on what it would look like to look into it. And because that may have had to happen under our watch as well. But he said we obliterated their nuclear program. The question then is not about what he did in June. This war we were in now did not attack the nuclear facilities again. Mm-hmm. This was not about the nuclear. So the question now becomes, can you do a deal with the Iranians? And the maximalist positions that both sides have are right now very far apart, despite all the rhetoric that we're almost there or we are there, but if we're not there, we'll bomb the hell out of them.
Now, I distinctly Antony Blinken, before Joe Biden withdrew from the presidential nomination of the Democratic Party, paving the way for Kamala Harris to be the nominee, he gave a speech in the United States. It was just, I think, a day or two before Netanyahu, the war criminal, came to the United States for yet another powwow with Joe Biden, in which he said Iran is days away from developing a nuclear weapon. And I commented on at the time that this was a clear, unambiguous sign that the Biden administration was contemplating a war on Iran. And have no doubt that if Kamala Harris had taken power, she was perfectly aligned with Joe Biden in foreign policy. There was never any apparent daylight between her views on these matters and that of the Biden regime. She probably would have done precisely what Amos Hochstein suggested Biden would have done, which is bomb Iran's nuclear facilities, which, by the way, is a crime. It's a crime against humanity. Nuclear facilities, for obvious reasons, have special protected status in international law. Bombing them is extraordinarily dangerous to the environment and to civilians. But you just heard it from Amos Hochstein. So I've been saying for some time, and so have others, that this is a bipartisan project that goes back many years. The desire or the goal of the neocons in Washington, whether they be Democrats or Republicans, to destroy Iran as a functioning sovereign nation and to ensure U.S. supremacy, Israeli hegemony throughout the entire region of West Asia, this extraordinarily important region geostrategically. And it's not just Amos Hochstein's recent commentary that leads me to that conclusion. We know that back in 2003, the neocons in Washington were openly embracing the phrase, boys go to Baghdad, real men go to Tehran. This was widely reported at the time. Dick Cheney was a huge fan of the former vice president of the United States under the younger Bush from 2000 to 2008, a huge fan of military action against the Islamic Republic, with a view to overthrowing it and destabilizing the country. We know that General Wesley Clark, I think it was back in 2007, discovered that there were plans within the Pentagon for taking out the governments of, I believe it was 7 or 8 predominantly Muslim states in North Africa and West Asia. And the last and most important on the list, at least from the perspective of geopolitics, was Iran. So this is a project that goes back decades. It's bipartisan. And even the Trumpster himself has been at pains to point out in the past few days that he's wanted to destroy Iran for a long time. He put out a series of posts today. This is one of them. He shared on Truth Social a post by somebody named Brigitte Gabriel, which includes a video of Trump speaking in 1980, 36 years ago, talking about how he'd love to take out Iran. So the idea that, all of a sudden Israel got some compromise on Trump and they've got him by the short and curlies and he really doesn't want to do this, but he's being forced by Netanyahu. I'm not buying that for 1 second. I have to repeat what I've said many times, and I'll say it until I'm blue in the face if I have to. Israel is a gigantic U.S. military base masquerading as a country. And with minor exceptions, it does essentially what Washington wants it to do. And there's nothing that the U.S. political elite, the neocons in Washington, of whom Trump is one, would love you to believe more that this is all Israel's fault. Because if and when the doo-doo hits the fan, and that is happening now as we speak in global oil markets and economically around the world, they are going to want to avoid responsibility for this. And I have said and believe strongly that most people in the U.S. oligarchy, in the political and economic elite of the West, would readily throw Israel and the Jewish people under the bus if they thought it was in their interest to do so. The only reason that the vast majority of them actually care about supporting Israel is because it is a means by which they can enhance their own power and wealth. the moment that they deem that supporting Israel is contrary to their own power and wealth, they'll dump it like a hot potato. And I think that that day may be near at hand, as a matter of fact, depending upon how all of this plays out. In any case, that's my report for today. If you found this video to be informative, please like and share it. And I hope that if you're not a subscriber, you'll become one. Help us to expand the reach, please, of our unapologetic resistance journalism. Signing off from Kalamata, Greece on April 22nd, this is Dimitri Lascaris for Reason to Resist.